John Mercer had been away from his small homestead for almost 3 months. The journey back had taken him across long stretches of open land, where wind moved slowly over dry grass and distant mountains looked soft blue in the afternoon light. He traveled mostly on foot, leading his old horse Patch, whose steps were steady and patient. John had grown used to silence during those long days. The only sounds were the creak of the saddle, the soft thud of hooves, and the quiet breath of the land itself. He was a man who had learned to listen to quiet things. He had left his cabin to work at a cattle ranch farther south, where he earned some supplies and a bit of money. It was not an easy job, but he was used to hard work. What he missed most during those months was not comfort or rest, but the sense of belonging that came with being in his own place. His cabin was small and simple, just one room with a stove, a table, and a bed built from pine boards. Yet it was his. Every piece of it had a memory. The door he had carved by hand, the shelves he built, the way the morning sun touched the single window and filled the room with gold. Returning to it felt like returning to himself. As John climbed the last hill before the cabin, he paused. Patch shook his mane as if he too recognized the familiar ground. From where John stood, he could see the line of cottonwood trees that grew near a small stream, and the open flat where deer sometimes passed at dusk. His cabin sat a little apart from the trees, the roof patched with fresh wood from last season. Smoke did not rise from the chimney. Everything looked still. Just as he had left it, John felt a gentle warmth in his chest. Home, he thought. He patted the horse's neck and continued walking. Evening was coming, and the sky was slowly turning orange. A bird called from somewhere nearby, and the air smelled of dust and dry leaves. When John reached the cabin door, he laid his hand on the latch and hesitated. It was a habit he had developed from years of living in quiet places. He always listened first. The land told him things, and often he could sense when something was different. At first, he noticed nothing unusual. The air was calm. No footprints fresh in the dirt outside, and the door itself was closed just as he had left it. Yet something subtle, something he could not name, made him pause an extra beat. He took a slow breath and pushed the door open. The first thing he saw was his bed, or rather what was on his bed. A person lay there wrapped in his wool blanket. The blanket was pulled up high, covering most of their body. The person's dark hair spilled across the pillow in long, tangled strands. For a moment, John did not move. He simply stood in the doorway, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light inside. The person was a young woman. She looked deeply tired, as though sleep had taken her suddenly and completely. Her breathing was calm, steady, and soft. There was no sign of fear or alarm. It was clear she had found this place not to take anything or cause trouble, but simply to rest. John felt no anger, only surprise and then a thoughtful stillness. Life in the open land had taught him many lessons, and one of the most important was this. Sometimes people crossed paths not by choice, but by need. And need, he believed, deserved kindness when possible. He set his pack quietly on the table. The sound was soft, yet the woman stirred slightly under the blanket. She did not wake, but her hand loosened as though she was releasing some hidden worry in her dreams. Her hair, slightly uneven where it had been trimmed long ago, framed her face. Even though she slept, there was a look of weariness, like someone who had traveled far and carried more than the weight of her own footsteps. John stepped back to give her space. He understood that waking to find a stranger standing over you could be frightening. He did not want that for her. So instead of speaking, he moved about the cabin slowly, doing quiet things. He filled a tin cup with water. He removed his coat and hung it on the hook he'd carved from a branch. With calm movements, he lit a small lamp. The warm light filled the room, making everything softer. He noticed details now. Her clothes were worn but well made, stitched with care. Her moccasins were dusty from long walking. Her hands were small but strong, showing someone who worked with skill. He did not know her story, but he could imagine pieces of it, traveling alone, perhaps searching for safety, perhaps carrying memories too heavy to speak aloud. Instead of questions, John offered patience. The cabin was still warm from the last bit of sunlight held in the wood walls. John sat quietly on a stool near the door, his presence steady and peaceful. The horse outside settled in the grass. The land fell back into evening quiet. After some time, the young woman began to wake. Her eyelashes fluttered lightly. Her breathing changed. She opened her eyes slowly, meeting the new world of waking with careful awareness. She did not cry out or jump. Instead, she looked at John with alert, watchful calm. John offered a small nod. Not a word, just a gentle acknowledgement. He could see that she understood he meant no harm. Her shoulders relaxed a little, though her gaze stayed cautious. John reached for the tin cup of water and placed it on the bed beside her, keeping his movements slow. She looked at the cup, then at him, as if measuring the meaning in the gesture. Finally, she reached out and held the cup with both hands. She drank slowly, almost thoughtfully, as though water was something precious not to be wasted. There was no shared language strong enough between them yet for many words, but sometimes words were not needed. There was respect in the quiet. Respect is a powerful bridge. When she finished drinking, she set the cup down gently. She did not attempt to leave the bed yet. John could see she was still tired. He spoke softly, his voice low and even. "You can rest. You are safe here." She listened to the tone more than the words. Tone can say many things that words cannot. She nodded once, barely, as if she allowed herself a small breath of relief. Then she lay back down, not fully asleep now, but resting with calm awareness. John moved the lamp slightly so the light was softer and sat back down, keeping a comfortable distance. He did not watch her directly. He looked at the fire stove, at the woodpile, at the simple things in the room that made up his quiet life. Yet he knew something new had entered that life, something unexpected. He did not know what this meeting would bring. He did not know who she was or where she had come from or what paths had led her to his door. But he sensed that this moment mattered. The land had a way of guiding people toward certain crossings of fate. He had learned to trust those crossings. That night, John did not feel the loneliness he usually felt when he returned home. The cabin, though still small and still quiet, felt different. Not crowded, not invaded, simply shared. Sometimes a story changes long before the people in it understand how, and without hurry, and without fear, the change had already begun. Morning light entered the cabin slowly, as though it were trying not to disturb anything. The young woman, whose name John would later learn, woke before the sun was fully up. She sat quietly on the edge of the bed for a moment, steadying her breath, as if she was still deciding whether the world she had woken to was safe or just another place to leave behind. The early light made the room warmer and softer. Dust motes floated in the light beams like tiny drifting stars. Outside, Patch grazed lazily near the cottonwoods, flicking his tail at small flies. Everything seemed calm. When she opened her eyes, she saw John sitting at the small table. He was whittling a piece of wood, carving smooth edges with slow care. He was not looking at her, but he knew she was awake. His calm presence filled the room like steady breath. There was no rush in him, no demand, no sharpness, only quiet patience. John lifted his eyes just enough to meet hers and nodded kindly. "Good morning," he said, though he did not know if she understood the words. The young woman studied him. She had the look of someone who had spent a long time learning how to judge a situation quickly. Her expression was thoughtful, not fearful. Her eyes were sharp, but her body remained calm. She was like the land outside, strong, quiet, aware. John stood up gently and moved toward the stove. The air soon filled with the smell of warm cornmeal. He made a simple porridge, stirring slowly so the texture stayed smooth. The sound of the spoon moving in the pot was small and comforting. When he finished, he set a bowl on the table and stepped back a little, leaving room for her to choose. He did not invite her with words or gestures. He simply allowed space. She watched for a moment. Then she rose from the bed, her movements steady but light, and walked to the table. She sat across from him, though not too close, with a careful awareness of distance. Her posture was upright, graceful, and natural. She tasted the porridge slowly, as though savoring something she had not expected. Warmth, food, or simply the experience of not needing to guard herself in that moment. She ate with quiet respect, and John did the same. They shared that morning meal in silence, yet the silence felt gentle, not awkward. It was the silence of two people who understood that words are not always the first language. After they finished eating, she placed her hand over her chest, then toward him, a gesture of thanks. John recognized kindness even when it came in unfamiliar forms. He gave a small smile. He decided then to try speaking carefully, using slow, simple English, hoping that something might be understood. "My name is John," he said softly. touching his own chest as he said it. She watched the gesture, listened to the sound. Then she touched her own chest lightly and spoke her name. Nahi. The sound of her name was gentle, like the wind that moves quietly through cottonwood leaves. John repeated it softly, careful to say it the way she had. Nahi. She nodded, and for the first time a small warmth touched her eyes. Not a smile exactly, but a softening, the beginning of trust. Names are the first bridges between strangers. As the morning continued, the cabin filled with the soft rhythm of shared chores. John stepped outside to gather wood for the stove, and Nahi followed, watching first, then helping. She carried branches lightly with practiced ease. The way she moved showed that she knew the land well, how to walk without wasting steps, how to notice small things others might miss, how to listen to the quiet. They stacked the wood neatly by the cabin wall. John did not instruct her, yet she placed each piece in a way that matched the pattern he had used. It was as though she understood by observing rather than speaking. They worked together with an easy flow that felt natural, though they had met only the day before. When they finished, Nahi walked a few steps toward the open field and looked at the far horizon. The land stretched wide with low hills and golden grasses. She stood there quietly, her eyes deep and thoughtful, as though the distance held memories she could not yet share. John watched her from a respectful distance. He did not ask questions. He knew that some stories needed time before they could be spoken, and some were spoken without words at all. Later, Nahi helped him fetch water from the stream. The path was narrow and familiar to John, but she walked it with ease, her steps quiet and sure. At the stream, she knelt and looked at the water, letting her fingers touch the cool surface. She closed her eyes briefly as if grounding herself. Sometimes a simple act, touching water, feeling earth beneath one's feet, can restore something inside that had grown thin. John filled the buckets, and on the walk back he felt something shift in the air. Not a dramatic change, but something soft, like a door gently opening in both their hearts. In the afternoon, John repaired a small fence near the cabin. He worked steadily, shaping wood and fitting pieces together. Nahi watched at first, then found a smooth rhythm helping hand him tools and hold posts steady. They did not need to speak. Their movement spoke for them. The land itself seemed to approve of the quiet cooperation. When they paused to rest, John offered her a small apple. She took it and bit into it slowly, the sweetness surprising her. She laughed softly, not loudly, but with a gentle sound that seemed to brighten the air. It was the first time John had heard her laugh, and something in him warmed as though a seed inside had found sunlight. As the day drew to evening, shadows lengthened across the grass. The sky softened into hues of peach and lavender. They sat near the cabin as Patch grazed nearby and birds settled in the trees for the night. John looked at Nahi and spoke again, slowly. "You can stay here, as long as you need. No hurry." He did not expect an answer right away. She sat still, her hands resting in her lap, her eyes focused on the horizon. She seemed to consider not just the words, but the space around them, the tone, the patience, the sincerity. Finally, she nodded once. A small nod, quiet but full of meaning, acceptance, trust, agreement. They watched the sun lower itself behind the hills, leaving soft colors in the sky. The world grew calm in that gentle way that only wide land can make possible. John did not think about the future too deeply that night. He did not wonder what might change or what would come next. He simply felt grateful that the cabin, once quiet with loneliness, now held a new presence that made the silence feel alive instead of empty. Nahi, too, seemed to soften. Though she still carried a quiet vigilance, it now shared space with something steadier, something beginning to bloom like the first green shoots after winter. The night passed peacefully, wrapped in calm. Two people, once strangers, now sharing air, work, and quiet understanding. The world outside remained wide and uncertain, but inside the small cabin, something gentle had begun to grow, something neither of them fully understood yet, but both softly welcomed. Sometimes the most important stories begin not with grand words, but with quiet presence, and their story had only just begun. Days passed in a gentle rhythm. The cabin, once quiet and still, now carried soft sounds of shared living. Footsteps, the scrape of wood, the whisper of water poured into bowls. the easy sighs of rest. The land around them remained wide and open, with wind that brushed the grass in long waves. Each sunrise brought new light, and with it small but meaningful changes in the way John and Nahi moved around one another. Trust does not arrive all at once. It grows slowly, like a plant that takes time to find its roots. In the mornings, John would wake early to tend the fire in the stove. He handled the wood gently as though he respected the warmth it gave. Nahi would rise soon after, her movements quiet but filled with natural grace. She helped prepare simple meals, beans, corn, bits of dried fruit. She worked with ease, as if her hands knew the language of daily life. One morning, while the sun was still low and golden, John stepped outside to repair the small corral fence where Patch sometimes rested. The boards had loosened after months of wind and changing weather. He carried tools and fresh wood, and Nahi followed without being asked. She did not step too close at first, giving him space, yet her presence felt steady, like a companion who understood when to offer help without needing to be told. John hammered gently, shaping the wood so it fit just right. Nahi watched, learning the pattern of his work. When he paused, she held a board in place for him. Their hands brushed once, only lightly, but even that small moment felt like something shared. Sometimes they worked in silence. Other times John spoke a few slow words and Nahi listened. She did not always answer with speech, but with her eyes, her expressions, and her quiet attentiveness. Their communication grew from gestures, tone, and patience more than from spoken language. As the days continued, John began teaching her small English words. He pointed to objects, the stove, the table, the door, the sky, and spoke their names. She listened carefully and repeated them softly, shaping each word with care. When she spoke, her voice was gentle and steady, like the slow flow of the stream near the cottonwoods. In return, Nahi taught him words from her own language. She pointed to the trees and said their name. She spoke the word for wind, for water, for morning light. John repeated what she said, and she gave a small approving nod when he managed to say the word correctly. Sometimes she smiled, a quiet, warm smile that touched her eyes. Language became a bridge between them, a slow and meaningful one. Together they cooked meals, tended small tasks, gathered herbs growing near the stream, and prepared the cabin for changing weather. Nahi showed John how to recognize certain plants that could soothe a sore stomach or help wounds heal more gently. She handled plants with deep understanding, as though she had learned their stories from someone who cared deeply for the land. John listened and followed her instructions with respect. One afternoon, the wind grew stronger. Gray clouds gathered along the distant hills. The weather was changing, and they both knew rain was coming. John and Nahi worked together to bring wood inside, close shutters, and make sure Patch had shelter near the shed. When the rain finally arrived, it swept across the land in soft sheets, tapping gently on the roof. The cabin felt warm and safe. They sat near the stove as the fire crackled softly, its orange glow reflecting off the wood walls. Nahi sat close enough to feel the warmth, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea they had made from dried leaves and mountain flowers. John watched the rain through the small window. He felt the peacefulness of that moment in the depth of his chest. It was the kind of peace he had not known for a long time, peace that did not come from being alone, but from sharing silence with someone who did not disturb it. Sometimes, when the rain grew heavier, they talked with simple words or soft gestures. However, there were moments when the silence was the most meaningful part of their day. It was a silence that did not need to be filled, a silence that held comfort instead of emptiness. As the days passed, John began to notice things about Nahi, how her eyes watched the horizon as if she understood stories the land told, how she hummed softly while working, how she paused to listen to the sound of the wind. Her presence was gentle, but there was strength in her, a strength that came from facing many seasons of life and learning to live gracefully with them. Nahi, too, began to notice things about John, how he prepared things with care instead of hurry, how he respected the land around him, how he never tried to hold her in his space only to share it. He did not try to control her or question her past. His kindness was steady, like a river that simply continues flowing. One day as they walked by the stream, Nahi bent down to pick up a smooth stone. She held it in her palm and showed it to John. There was a small pattern on it made by water over many years, a pattern that looked almost like the curve of a feather. She placed the stone in his hand. not as a gift of possession but as a gesture of shared understanding. John looked at the stone, then at her. He felt something warm move through him, something gentle, not rushed, not overwhelming, something like the beginning of care. They returned to the cabin together, walking side by side, their steps falling into the same quiet rhythm. The land around them was still large, still full of unknowns, but the small world they were building in the cabin had begun to feel like home for both of them, not because the walls were strong or because the space was comfortable, but because of the presence they shared. Trust had begun to grow roots. In the evenings, when they ate together, there was a calm sense of togetherness. Patch rested nearby, sometimes lifting his head to listen to the quiet sounds inside the cabin. One evening, while the sun was setting and the sky was glowing with soft orange light, John noticed something small but important. Nahi no longer sat near the door as she had in the first days. At first, she had positioned herself near the exit as though ready to leave at any moment. Now she sat near the center of the room where the warmth was strongest. It was a quiet sign of comfort, of feeling safe. John did not say anything about it. He simply noticed and felt grateful. There were no sudden expressions of emotion between them. No grand speeches. No dramatic moments. Their bond grew in gentle ways. Shared chores, shared silence, shared meals, shared glances that said more than words could. The world outside remained wide and sometimes uncertain, but inside that small cabin, life had begun to feel steady, balanced, and meaningful. It was easy to see that something important was forming between them, something soft, steady, and honest, something that did not rush and did not demand, but simply grew, like a tree finding light and space to reach upward. They did not yet call it love, but it was love, quietly growing, like dawn slowly lighting the sky. Time passed softly and the land slowly shifted into a warmer season. The days grew brighter, and the air carried a gentle warmth that rested on the skin like a quiet welcome. Grass turned greener near the stream, and the cottonwood leaves shimmered when the wind passed through them. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm at the cabin. John and Nahi had come to understand each other more deeply. They did not rush anything. They simply allowed trust to grow in its own time. Some mornings they worked together in the small garden behind the cabin, planting seeds for the coming summer. Other days they followed deer tracks near the hills, gathering plants and roots that could be used for food or tea. They shared knowledge with each other. John showed how to repair tools and shape wood, while Nahi taught how to read signs in the weather and how to recognize which plants were gentle and helpful. Their days were simple, but meaningful. Yet even in quiet lives, change comes. One late afternoon, the sunlight stretched long shadows across the grass. The air felt still, like the land was holding its breath. John and Nahi were sitting outside, weaving a small basket from reeds they had gathered near the stream. The work was calm, the kind that allows the mind to rest while the hands move with purpose. Then, Patch lifted his head. His ears twitched. His posture changed slightly, not fearful but alert. Animals often sense things before people do. John paused. He listened. Far away he heard something. Soft hoofbeats, the steady rhythm of horses moving across open ground. The sound was gentle, not rushed, not threatening. Yet it was unexpected. Travelers, perhaps. Nahi also heard the sound. Her expression did not change quickly, but her eyes grew a little focused, like someone listening to memory rather than sound. She did not speak, but she set her basket aside with quiet care. Within a few minutes, the riders came into view. There were 3 of them moving at a calm pace. They were not strangers to the land. Their movements showed familiarity with open trails and long travel. Their clothing was worn from sun and wind. They looked like people who lived close to nature, who knew hardship and patience both. John did not stand quickly. He rose slowly and placed himself near the front of the cabin, not blocking the doorway, but simply present. Nahi remained beside him, but a little behind, not out of fear, but out of quiet thoughtfulness. The riders approached, then slowed their horses to a gentle stop a short distance away. The air held a respectful stillness. The man nearest the front of the group spoke first. His tone was calm, his voice steady. He did not accuse. He did not demand. He simply said that they were searching for someone who had traveled alone. A woman, someone dear to their community. They wanted to know if she was safe and if she wished to return. His words were not sharp. They did not carry force. They carried concern. John listened closely. He nodded once to show he understood. Then he stepped slightly aside, not in surrender, not in defense, but as a gesture of allowing space for Nahi to choose. This moment was not about John making decisions for her. It was about her voice. Nahi stepped forward gently, her face calm. She stood tall, but with softness. The riders looked at her with recognition, relief, and also quiet respect. One of the riders, a woman, placed her hand over her heart. It was a gesture of welcome, not pressure. The air seemed to still, like the world was waiting for Nahi's choice. John did not speak. He simply stood nearby, steady, open, dependable. His presence said one thing clearly: your choice is your own. Nahi breathed slowly and looked at the riders. Then she looked at John. Her eyes reflected something deep: gratitude, understanding, and a quiet tenderness that had grown from the time they had shared. She touched the wooden bracelet she had carved with John's help. Her fingers lingered there for a moment, as though holding a memory. She spoke softly in her own language. The words were gentle, like leaves moving in evening wind. The riders listened. The woman among them nodded slowly. It was clear the words meant, "I am safe. I am choosing to stay." There was no conflict, no argument, no raised voices. The riders accepted her decision with dignity. They did not try to convince her otherwise. They understood that a heart must find its own place. One of them dismounted and walked forward. He placed a small woven pouch near the cabin door. A simple gift, perhaps herbs, seeds, or a small meaningful object. Something given to show goodwill, to honor her path. Then, before they left, the woman rider spoke gently in English, enough for John to understand. "She is strong. You have given her peace. That is something rare." John nodded, his expression quiet and sincere. The riders turned back toward the open land. Their horses moved with calm steps, and soon they faded into the horizon, leaving only the sound of wind and the soft rustle of grass. Nahi watched them go, standing still for a long moment. Not in sadness and not in regret, simply in reflection. When she finally turned back to John, her expression was peaceful. There was something new in her presence, not relief because she had not been afraid, but certainty. A sense of belonging chosen, not given. She walked closer to John and sat beside him on the step outside the cabin. The sky was slowly turning pink and gold as the sun began to lower. Birds were returning to the cottonwoods to settle for the evening. They did not speak for a long time. They did not need to. The connection between them felt clear now, steady as the earth beneath their feet, gentle as the evening breeze, quiet as shared breath. John knew that something had changed, not dramatically, not loudly, but deeply. Their lives were now bound not by chance, not by need, but by mutual respect and quiet care. Nahi had chosen to stay. He had chosen to welcome, not possess. The land around them glowed with warm sunset light, as though the world itself recognized the moment. Sometimes the heart is changed not by grand events, but by quiet choices, shared trust, shared stillness, shared belonging, and in that simple, beautiful silence, something tender and lasting took root. Spring slowly opened itself across the land. The days grew longer, and the air carried the scent of new leaves and soft blossoms. The stream near the cabin sparkled more brightly in the sunlight, and small birds made nests among the cottonwood branches. The world seemed to breathe more gently, as though welcoming the season of renewal. Inside the cabin, life found a steady rhythm. John and Nahi no longer moved like two people learning to share space. They moved like two voices in the same song, each note soft, balanced, and natural. Their footsteps, their chores, their thoughts all began to flow in harmony without needing to be spoken aloud. In the mornings, they walked to the garden together. The seeds they had planted earlier had begun to sprout. Small green shoots pushed through the soil, reaching upward as though eager to greet the sun. John would kneel to loosen the earth around them, while Nahi gently poured water with careful hands. She spoke to the plants in a quiet tone, not in full sentences, just soft encouragement, as though sharing kindness with something small and growing. John listened to her voice and felt peace settle into him. After tending the garden, they often sat by the stream. John liked to listen to the sound of running water. It reminded him that life keeps moving gently forward no matter what the past holds. Nahi collected small, smooth stones, feathers, and leaves that drifted along the bank. She arranged them in small patterns like tiny stories shaped by nature. Sometimes she showed these patterns to John, and he understood that each one held meaning, not in the objects themselves, but in the attention given to them. It was a reminder that life is shaped not only by grand events, but by small thoughtful acts. Their days were calm, but never dull. Sometimes, John taught Nahi how to fix tools, shape wood, or make small repairs around the cabin. His hands were steady and his movements held patience. Nahi watched and learned quickly, her eyes focused and her mind clear. In return, she taught John how to weave baskets more firmly, how to look at the sky to understand weather changes, and how to prepare herbs to ease tired muscles. Her knowledge was gentle but strong, carried like memory handed down through many hands before hers. The bond between them grew not through excitement or urgency, but through shared time. Each evening, when the sun lowered behind the hills and soft colors filled the sky, they would sit beside the cabin, watching the horizon change. The world often looked golden at that hour, as though touched by something sacred. He sometimes hummed a quiet tune, her voice low and calming. John did not know the words, but he understood the feeling: peace, reflection, and a quiet kind of joy. One evening, as they sat together, Nahi turned slightly toward John. She did not rush to speak. She waited for the moment to be full and comfortable. Then she spoke softly in English, her voice slow and clear. "Thank you," she said. John looked at her gently. "For what?" She paused and touched her hand lightly to her heart. Then she extended her hand toward the land around them, the cabin, the trees, the sky. Her gesture spoke more than words. "Thank you for giving me space, safety, belonging, and freedom to choose my own life." John felt something move inside him. Deep, warm, steady. He did not need to respond with many words. "You belong here, if you choose it," he said quietly. Nahi nodded. Her eyes softened, filled with a warmth that had grown slowly, carefully. A warmth that had roots. Belonging is not something given. It is something shared, and now they shared it fully. As spring continued, they began building something new together. John had always thought of the cabin as finished, complete. Yet now he saw space for growth. He and Nahi began shaping a small additional room from wood, one that would serve as a place to dry herbs, store woven baskets, and keep tools. They worked side by side, measuring, lifting, trimming. Their laughter sometimes rose into the open air, quiet but joyful. Their conversations were simple, but meaningful. They spoke of what seeds to plant next, how to store food for the winter, where to build a shade roof for Patch, and how to arrange the new shelves inside the cabin. They shared thoughts the way people share bread, gently, with care, and with appreciation. The cabin no longer felt like a place made for one life. It felt like a home shaped for two hearts. One day, when the warm season was nearly at its height, they walked up a small hill behind the cabin. From there, the land stretched wide and gentle. The air smelled of wild sage and earth warmed by the sun. They sat together under a tree, the leaves giving soft shade. The view felt endless. Nahi closed her eyes and breathed deeply, as though she was receiving something from the land itself. A memory, a blessing, or simple comfort. John, watching her, felt a quiet certainty settle inside him. He had lived many years believing his life would always be solitary. He had accepted the silence of the land as his only companion. Yet now the silence felt full, not empty. It held presence, connection, and warmth. Nahi opened her eyes and looked at John. Her gaze was steady and calm. There was no sudden declaration, no dramatic moment. Their feelings did not need to be spoken. They already lived inside every shared day, every step taken together, every soft look or gentle smile. Still, the moment was clear. It was the quiet understanding of two hearts choosing each other. They sat there for a long time, simply sharing breath and space, letting the wind, the land, and the open sky witness what had grown between them. In the weeks that followed, life continued in its gentle rhythm. The garden flourished. The cabin felt strong. Patch moved contently across the grass. The nights were warm, filled with stars like tiny lanterns in the sky. Sometimes, when dawn arrived, John would wake and watch the morning light touch Nahi's face. Her presence filled the cabin with calm and meaning. Nahi, too, would wake and see John's steady form and know she was among kindness. Their story did not need grand endings or loud celebrations. Its beauty was in its quietness. Two people from different worlds, different paths, different beginnings had found a place where those differences did not divide them, but instead created a space for understanding, respect, and love to grow. John had returned home expecting only silence. He found a companion. Nahi had arrived expecting only shelter. She found belonging, and together, they found something new. A shared life formed from patience, trust, and gentle courage. Their hearts had changed softly, steadily, forever.